Harlem was a mecca for black culture in the early 20th century. This neighborhood gave birth to a social, intellectual, music, and artistic movement that reconceptualized what it meant to be black. So many incredible pioneers rose to the forefront of African American culture. Musical artists like Billie Holiday, writers like Langston Hughes, and incredible women like Augusta Savage. Here, we will examine a few of the people mentioned in order to shed a little light on the Harlem Renaissance. Ladies first, so it's only right that we introduce Billie Holiday. This lovely African-American queen was born on April 7, 1915 in Philadelphia. During the 1930s, she had been in various Harlem clubs displaying her beautiful singing voice. She was discovered by producer John Hammond, who believed in her talent. He paid for her to cut her first record with Columbia with a studio group led by Benny Goodman. This would be the kickstart of a successful and influential career for many years. In 1937, she started working with a sax player, Lester Young, who nicknamed her Lady Day. Lady Day shined so bright, by 1938, she became the first black woman to work with an all-white orchestra. Her fire kept burning, and by 1941, she co-wrote the legendary song, God Bless the Child. Even though her life came to a tragic end at 44, she had left a stamp in musical history for African Americans and pioneered a new way of manipulating, phrasing, and tempo of music. William Henry Webb, known as Chick Webb, was born in Baltimore on February 10, 1907. Life started off pretty rough for him. He was born with congenital tuberculosis. It hindered him from fully developing. He was near dwarf height, with a hunchback and broad shoulders. This didn't stop him from his passion of drumming that led him to be a legendary drummer and band leader. As a child, he worked as a newspaper boy to save enough money to buy drums, and he first played professionally at age 11. At age 17, he moved to New York and began leading his own band in Harlem during the Renaissance. After hitting up various clubs with his band, they became the house band at the Savoy Ballroom. His unique style of playing drums had energy and paved the way for other African Americans. They referred to him as the daddy of them all, and at the Savoy in Battle of the Bands, he often won and was deemed king of swing. Unfortunately, his life was cut short because of a surgery. He's gone but never forgotten. He's a true definition of never let anything in life set you back. Our last musician is Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was born on August 4, 1901 in New Orleans. He began to perform with bands in small clubs and played at funerals and parades around town in New Orleans. His amazing talent made him well known around the world as Satchmo or Pops. He was widely recognized as a founding father of jazz. Armstrong's charismatic stage presence impressed not only the jazz world, but all of popular music. He recorded several songs throughout his career and is best known for songs like Stardust, La Vie en Rose, and What a Wonderful World. King Oliver played a huge role in kickstarting his musical career by becoming his mentor. In 1936, he became the first African American to be in a major motion picture and the first African American jazz musician to write an autobiography, Swing That Music. During the mid-50s, Armstrong's popularity overseas skyrocketed. This led some to alter his longtime nickname Satchmo to Ambassador Satch. He performed all over the world in the 1950s and 60s, including Europe, Africa, and Asia. Breaking all racial barriers, he was a force that could not or would not stop. Langston Hughes was a key literary figure in the Harlem Renaissance. His works were dedicated to the depiction of the happy moments and failures of working-class African Americans. He wrote short stories, novels, and plays, and was well known for his interest in jazz. He also reflected jazz culture in his writings, and specifically in his poem, Montage of a Dream Deferred. Hughes was notable for his attitudes to the working-class black community, in contrast with other famous writers of the Harlem Renaissance. Hughes refused to separate himself from the common experience of the African American part of the population and his personal experience as a black person in a predominantly white country. In his writings, Hughes created a realistic and simple atmosphere that reflected the cultural features of the Black community and showed their joys, struggles, love for music, language, and daily activities. Hughes believed that the Harlem Renaissance allowed Negro writers to be brave and to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. This expression did not depend on the opinion of whites. Harlem gave African Americans an opportunity to accept themselves and their beauty and ugliness at the same time. The works of Langston Hughes conquered the hearts of the new generation of African Americans, but the minds of the new Negro were captured by W.E.B. Du Bois. Along with Hughes, Du Bois was one of the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance. He introduced the philosophical side of the Harlem movement and the concept of double consciousness that defined dualism of Black Americans. According to Du Bois, double consciousness meant the awareness of personal self as well as the awareness of the way other people perceive this self. It emphasized a number of important philosophical problems of the acceptance of Blacks in the white society. Double consciousness highlighted the influence of white stereotypes on the life of African Americans, the existence of systematic racism that excluded Blacks from social life, and the presence of the internal conflict and the struggle to accept both the African and the American identities. Besides, the writings of Du Bois established the key concept of the Harlem Renaissance movement. He was the first to highlight that Negroes are true artists, that the music of the Black slaves was the true American music, and that laughter and songs of African Americans had contributed to the development and enrichment of the African and American cultures. Du Bois was also the first to state that artistic and literary talents of Blacks could become a powerful weapon in the fight for justice and civil rights. He reflected his vision of the use of art for the achievement of justice and respect in his works The Quest of the Silver Fleece and The Star of Ethiopia. Hughes and Du Bois were the fathers of the Harlem Renaissance who conquered the hearts and minds of the new Negro, but the spirit of the generation found its reflection in the poems of Claude McKay. Claude McKay was among the first African-American Harlem poets, and his works had a prominent impact on the writings of other Harlem poets, including Hughes. In contrast with the most part of the Harlem writers who were born in the United States, McKay was an immigrant, and his non-American origin allowed him portraying the joys and struggles of Blacks from a different perspective. The poems of McKay gave voice to Black immigrants in the United States and also allowed him to express his love for the country, regardless of all hate and pain that he experienced throughout his life. For example, one could see the reflection of love towards America in McKay's most famous poem called America. McKay wrote the poem on the basis of Du Bois's concept of double consciousness and reflected the duality of the American identity. He alternates between his frustration and anger and his love and admiration toward the United States. Although she sinks into my throat, her tiger's tooth, I will confess, I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. In America, McKay emphasizes that the struggles he experiences in his life make him stronger and that the energy and vitality of the country keep him standing up every time he undergoes a new test. The attitudes and hopes of McKay brilliantly reflected the struggles and views of the Black community, and his poems inspired Black people to continue their fight for respect and social justice.